Is Agatha connected?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to start.
Chiedi se ti sente.
Agatha, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So welcome everyone to our session on the Foreign Subsidies Regulation 1 year on. We're now approaching in October the 1 year anniversary of the filing obligations under the FSR coming into effect. And so we thought it would be a good time now to take stock of the enforcement experience to date. Looking at the Draghi report, which I think every single panel has mentioned at this conference, and specifically at the chapter on revamping competition, and then also at the mission letter by Commission President von der Leyen to the proposed Commissioner for Competition, Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, it is clear that the FSR will continue to be enforced vigorously in the future. In his report, Draghi calls on the Commission to use the FSR tools to respond to the new economic and geopolitical situation in the EU. And von der Leyen's letter similarly emphasizes the need for a very robust enforcement of the FSR. Still, it is fair to say that the FSR is an instrument that both the Commission and parties are still learning to use and to comply with. In this sense, we're looking really at a system that is in evolution and where further legal certainty is required and no doubt will emerge over time. So we will also discuss what we would like to see in terms of further clarity as the enforcement experience by the Commission accumulates, and also what we can expect in the future in terms of clarifications and further guidance from the Commission to the extent this is possible. We have a really great panel of experts with us today, which represent experience from all three of the Commission, in-house and private practice. Just to briefly introduce the panel, we are joined remotely from Brussels by Agata Mazurkiewicz, Head of Unit in Directorate K, dealing with foreign subsidies in the context of concentrations. Agata is one of three heads of unit in Directorate K. And so our discussion today will primarily focus on the application of the FSR to M&A transactions. I think, as a lot of you will know, the application of the FSR in the context of public procurement procedures falls within the remit of DG GROW. In the room with us today, we have Joanna Lennart, who is Senior Legal Counsel for Competition from A.P. Moller-Maersk, and also Emilio De Giorgi, who's a partner at A&O SHEARMAN and head of the firm's antitrust practice in Italy. Just in terms of the structure of today's session, Agata has very kindly offered to set the scene for us by providing a brief overview of the legislative context. And we will then discuss some relevant developments and some outstanding questions. And finally, time allowing, we'll be happy to take questions from the room. So with that, I hand over to Agata to set the scene for us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really sorry I cannot be there with you, but still, thank you for your patience, also for this, let's say, not ideal setting when I cannot be there with you, but I hope it will be still interesting discussion, and I will try to provide you with some insights also from far away. Indeed, we have this is a 1 year anniversary of the reporting obligations under the Foreign Subsidies Regulation, and I just wanted to provide a little summary. We have indeed received a number of notifications which has exceeded the expected numbers. So far, we have, I think, closed more than 80 cases without any concerns. There is a number of cases in the preliminary review or in the pre-notification context. We can say that over this 1 year, we have dealt with more or less 100 cases. It's an interesting occasion because just yesterday we have adopted our first decision under the FSR regulation, which had a quite interesting coverage also in the sense that not only this was the first case in which we have opened in-depth investigation, it was regarding the Emirates acquisition of the telecommunication business in parts of Europe. There was an in-depth investigation open in July, and yesterday the decision clearing the acquisition subject to commitments provided by the parties significantly earlier than the normal the deadline would have been. I think the deadline was somewhere in December, and then we can discuss even a bit later also about this case. I think in terms of our experience, we see that we see a certain progress in the quality of notifications, in the fewer questions we are receiving regarding the notions used in the Foreign Subsidies Regulation about our interpretation of those notions. We have had a number of sets of questions and answers published on our website, and clarifications also in July, and we think, we see the result of that. Also during this year we have launched some ex officio investigations, which are also of interest for us and for the, let's say, community, in particular investigation ongoing as regards the wind sector, also inspections, the downgrades that we have organized in the area of security equipment, so Nuctec company, downgrades in Poland and the Netherlands, and the decision that on the inspection test was appealed, and also some decision of the president of the court regarding the access to information in that case, which will help us absolutely in the future in the enforcement of the FSR. So indeed, as you pointed out, the mission letters, the Draghi report point out that the Commission should continue with the vigorous enforcement of the regulation. That is indeed the plan. This is also the time to determine priorities, a bit strategies for the upcoming mandate. I think there is also clear indication, in particular in these mission letters, of the need of the cooperation, and which is indeed the plan. So there would be cooperation for sure between DG Competition, DG Grow as regards this public procurement module, and also putting a little bit this instrument in the context, also when cooperating with DG Trade and the trade defense instruments that are being enforced there. And you can also see it a little bit in the recent tariffs on the electric vehicles, where certain instruments are used. We choose to use that instrument on the other. That also requires coordination and discussions within the Commission. I would maybe stop here to leave some space for further discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Agata, for that very helpful overview. So you referred to the fact that the number of notifications that you have received far exceeds the anticipated number of notifications. I think I recall the Commission indicating that they were expecting some 30 notifications in the first year of enforcement of the FSR, and you refer to a number around 80 notifications to date. So what do you think is the reason for this, and how is the Commission handling this unexpected volume of notifications? And then maybe a two-part question. During the consultation in relation to the draft implementing regulation, most concerns that were raised by respondents were in relation to the administrative burden that this new regulation would impose on parties, and in particular there were concerns around the impact on the deal timetables. So I think it would be quite interesting to understand what proportion of the notifications that you have been handling related to concentrations that also needed a filing under the UMR. And in those situations, were the timetables broadly aligned, or were there divergences in terms of the timeline for a review of these transactions under the two regimes?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think, well, indeed, that was the number of notifications is relatively high. Partially, we were able to verify or project the number of notifications as regards one of the thresholds, so the number of cases of mergers with the turnover that we have, the level of 500 million in the EU. But of course, we had very little visibility regarding the foreign financial contributions received by the buyers, by the merging companies. So that we clearly underestimated that this must have led to this bigger number of notifications. But I don't have statistics about, as regards the number of parallel cases under the merger regulation, but from my experience, like vast majority of cases is also at the same time in-house being reviewed under the merger regulation. And also in this context mentioned by you regarding timetable and the concerns about possible delays in the process, in the acquisition processes, as you know, the timing of the revision under the FSR is very much inspired by the timelines that apply in the merger context. So we also have, we encourage a lot, and we have it basically in all the cases, the pre-notification discussions, then we have the time for the preliminary review of 25 working days, and then, okay, if there were to be in-depth investigation, this also pretty much follows the timing that is there in the context of mergers. We do coordinate, and sometimes I think it's very rarely that our investigation would have lead to some delays. It would be maybe the other way around, in the sense that if there are proceedings that take a lot of time because requires market investigation in the merger context, we might be a bit slower in our investigation, just to manage cases efficiently overall, so that we are not a delay. If there would be a risk of that, we would probably treat the case as a priority to ensure that this is not happening. But in general, I think the cooperation is good, and in general, we get also quite positive feedback from law firms. Even in this phase of the pre-notification, we aim to have a similar approach like in mergers, that the Commission should reply within 5 working days. So this is not unnecessarily delayed. And well, we try to do this.
Thank you, Agatha. Also, in my experience, the pre-notification tends to be around 2 months, which is not unusual in the context of merger control. Obviously, I'm sure there are some outliers, but yeah, indeed, I was positively surprised by that. And then now turning to Emilio and Joanna, what are your thoughts on whether the thresholds are calibrated at the right level? So in the light of this unexpected volume of notifications, do you consider that they are too low, too high, about right, given the objective of the FSR to capture all transactions that might have an impact or distortive impact on the level playing field?
Thank you, Francesca. That's a very good question, and I think it remains to be seen, because over time we will have a better idea whether they're too high or too low. But maybe at this point, let me share a couple of views and observations. When it comes to the thresholds applying to concentrations, the turnover thresholds of 500 million euros, I think it's quite a substantial turnover, so I would not consider it too low, I would not consider it too high, probably it's optimal. However, when it comes to the threshold applying to financial contributions of 50 million euros over the 3 last year, I think the answer to this one would very much depend on the perspective you have. And here I'm speaking from the perspective of a global company active in more than 130 jurisdictions and also involved in many local projects for which we might be receiving some subsidies. For example, a local project, let's say, in the US or in Vietnam. And this is also captured. So from my perspective, this threshold is relatively low, and it adds some administrative burden, as Francesca mentioned, but we will come back to that. And I know in this session we focus on concentrations, but maybe let me also mention 2 points on the public procurement thresholds. 250 million euros, to me it sounds a little bit low, especially that many projects in infrastructure, let's say road construction, exceeds that threshold, and also the threshold referring to the value of financial contributions is also very low, because it's 4 million euros stretched over 3 years. And I think the numbers also speak for themselves, because in DG GROW, the team that is dealing with that received over 800 notifications in the last year.
I think Agatha, confirmed my impression, which is basically the issue for this high number of notification is the second threshold, the contribution threshold. And I think here the risk is that, this is important tool. Obviously the Commission, as every organization, has limited resources. And so the potential issue is that, you have to deal with a number of notification, and so basically the tool may not be so effective, because the risk is that then you don't have the energy to use another very important power of the Commission, which is the calling power, so the energy to identify merger concentration which are below the threshold but still could raise issue. And so in this respect, I think basically it is important to speak about the threshold, but also it is important to consider the policy behind this tool. I remember when the instrument was introduced, the first complaint obviously was about football. Paris Saint-Germain receiving subsidy from Qatar, and a Belgian team, the second division, ordered by Manchester City, the same. I understand that the Commission is not, I don't know if will intervene. I hope not because I'm a supporter of Paris Saint-Germain, but I think that in this moment we have a more serious issue, and so obviously the European Commission, with limited resources, should use this power in dealing with other sectors. And in this respect, I think the Draghi report make important observation, and basically said, in my view, this instrument should be used to focus on the green transition, so with company dealing with the decarbonization of the economy. So this should be the focus, and we should be more careful in intervening in the tech sector, in which possibly the European companies need to have access to foreign technology, and so we should be, something like we should be more careful. So I think at the end of the day, I understand that the threshold, and if this is the reality, are possibly too overreaching. And so here it will be very important for the European Commission. It's very easy to say, difficult to implement, to have a clear policy and focusing its energy where they should be used.
Thank you for your comments. Indeed, I guess the difference between the FSR and the merger control regime is that for the moment we still don't have a simplified procedure in the context of the FSR, but we'll maybe come to discussing that later in this, in this panel. Then just moving away a bit from the kind of more procedural aspects of the FSR, I think much has been said also at this conference about the potential tension between competition enforcement in the EU and the broader policy objectives that the EU is trying to achieve. And so I wonder, Joanna, as a company that is having to adapt to the changing landscape, do you see, or do you have any thoughts on the potential interaction between the FSR and other policy objectives, in particular, given also the nature of the business that you operate in, the green transition?
Yeah, the green transition is very close to our hearts indeed. And here, as a company, of course, we will continue investing in green transition. But I have two general thoughts on that. I am wondering if the burden of going through FSR and not the filing itself maybe, but the collection of data and so on could discourage certain companies from certain investments in the EU when it comes to green transitions or buildings, wind farms, solar panel investments, or electric cars. Also when it comes to public procurement procedures. So this is one general concern. Maybe it's not substantiated. We will see in the future. And another point that I have that I'm really keen on seeing in the future a case how the Commission would actually be balancing the objectives of the green transition in the balancing test exercise when it will be reviewing an FSR application.
Thank you, Joanna. So then switching back to more practical concerns in the context of the notification process, in pre-notification, in my experience, you see the Commission has been rather open to granting or at least discussing with parties potential waivers to reporting obligations. So could you, Agata, please comment on the types of waivers that the Commission has been willing to grant to parties, and also perhaps comment on whether, as the Commission gains further experience into what type of information is really material to its assessment, whether we can expect any kind of more flexibility on that front, or whether there are other discussions happening within the Commission on how to make the process perhaps less burdensome where appropriate.
Yes, thank you very much. It's indeed very well spotted that we don't have the simplified procedure, and I think in the future, when discussing precisely possible change in thresholds, this would be another aspect to take into account. It could be, I don't know, both. It could be also keeping the thresholds as they are, but with further simplification. But as you know, under merger regulation, we had tens of years of experience, and over time it was also evolving how and when we have applied the simplified procedures. I think we will get to this point, which might be a little bit obscure for you, in the sense that in our handling of cases, we will have to have a kind of manual or a way of dealing with, let's call it less problematic, non-problematic cases. And then with more and more practice, this could translate into indeed some simplified procedures. Now, as regards the waivers, well, my impression is that often the first phases of this pre-notification discussion is about establishing the facts. I must say that not without a reason, okay, sometimes the regulation was presented as a Chinese regulation. There was the context of the regulation, the geopolitical discussions, and so on. But of course, the regulation as such is not Chinese, is not targeted at any specific third countries, about foreign subsidies. And maybe sometimes, or at the beginning in particular, for some companies, it was not that obvious that if they have nothing to do with third party, I mean, no ownership, no third country ownership in particular, they still need to report about foreign subsidies received. And we have a lot of relative big proportion of cases where it's either European companies buying European companies or US companies buying European companies. And then maybe there was some assumption that this could be already some sort of simplified approach, whereas all these companies have to report on foreign subsidies received, and therefore, as explained numerously, that the FSR regulation is this filling the regulatory gap and ensuring the equal treatment between what we do in Europe as regards state aid control and subsidies received here in Europe, and then when the same companies receive subsidies from abroad, this was before the FSR was considered a gap, and we could not do anything about it. I think so part of the pre-notification discussions is about establishing the facts and having the information and being clear on what we are looking at. And then as regards the waivers, I must say, unfortunately, it's very much case-by-case assessment, but it always requires some analysis in the sense why whatever the information would be, this would be less irrelevant for the assessment of the Commission. Because, for example, I don't know, the subsidies were used locally, where, there are exceptions already codified in the implementing regulation as regards, for example, foreign subsidies or foreign financial contributions being the payments that the companies received. For example, because there was a contract with public authorities elsewhere, but if it is on market terms, if it is following a tender procedure, then we already have some simplifications. One example of a waiver that could be, I think would require some justification, but I think could be relatively easy, is when we have transactions consisting in changes from joint to sole control. which, and I think it's relatively easy to explain why this is unlikely to raise concerns in terms of subsidies distorting competition in Europe. And I think we will try to collect more examples like this for the future, as I said, more open and transparent presentation of this to the law firm, to the outside world. At this stage, we think we need a bit more, statistics, so to say, the basis and the experience to see. And the more we have, so in a way, it's maybe not that bad that we have many. It's easier to build a case and say that we can safely find some shortcuts in these areas.
Thank you, Agata, for those examples, and hopefully they will be also reflected in future guidance from the Commission on the FSR. Then perhaps just briefly covering the practical realities of doing an FSR filing. So, as we all know, the reporting obligations require the disclosure of considerable information, and information that in most cases companies were not previously systematically collecting. And certainly not in the ordinary course of business. And there's also obviously the need then to keep that information updated over time. So Joanna, from your in-house experience, I was wondering whether there are any systems or processes that you as Merckx have implemented that you're finding helpful to tackle this problem.
Yes, very much so. And it's indeed a continuous work in progress that involves, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of colleagues from finance department, tax department, and also our competition law and policy team. And of course, we have many subsidiaries, many business units that deal with different businesses locally and globally. So it was a matter of first identifying the right people, which is not an easy task in a company that has over 100,000 employees globally. Then we've spent quite some time preparing actually and implementing the system. So if I share a little bit of our internal cuisine, what we've done, we've prepared an FAQ, extensive FAQ for colleagues who are collecting the data. And this FAQ included questions like how often this exercise has to be performed, to which year the subsidy should be allocated, so very, very practical questions. Then the second part was an FSR questionnaire itself with answers yes, no. And we started with the definition of foreign financial contribution, which we also needed to add some explanation in more a layman language to make sure that all the relevant colleagues understand what we talk about. And then at the very end, it's the list of financial contributions. If the answer was yes to the previous one, then of course the value and the description of the contribution. And this is work in progress, as I said. Apparently tax is very, very complicated. And again, we are quite lucky to have all these colleagues who can help us collect the data. However, these colleagues also have their daily jobs, right? So it comes on top of everything else that they have. Of course, we would have certain suggestions, what could be improved in terms of FSR. For example, if we could have exemptions to report certain data, for example, financial contributions related to local investments that have no link to the EU, then it would be very, very helpful. I know that the implementing regulation already helps a lot. And I'm not downplaying that because it does help a lot. However, we see some room for further improvements.
Thank you, Joanna. Indeed, in my experience, it's not always straightforward to identify what are relevant financial contributions for the purposes of applying the thresholds. So legal certainty, of course, is a key aspect when implementing a new regulation that needs to be integrated into existing business processes. The FSR does provide a deadline for the Commission to issue additional guidance in the form of guidelines by the 12th of January 2026, so just over 2 years from when the notification obligations kicked in. And also, the Commission did publish a staff working document at the end of July, which already provided some much-needed clarifications. So question for you, Agatha. Can you share with us whether, and if so, when, we can expect further guidance from the Commission, or whether the Commission is in fact now very much focused on the guidelines that it will have to publish in 2026 and on the related consultation process? And if that is the case, then when can we expect that process to kick off?
Yes, so well, you have summarized very well all these different work streams. Indeed, guidelines are to be published in January 2026, and we started work already on them. I think there will be a call for evidence published pretty soon, and then there will be questions, but most likely targeted questions to member states or associations, and at some point in 2025 there will be draft guidelines also subject to consultations. It is not an easy process because, of course, again, for these notions, especially of distortion, as mentioned before also by Joanna, balancing in particular could be quite a challenging task for us as well, and without case practice it's very difficult to go in this direction and to go deeper, and well, we can consider various possibilities, but it's not an easy task. I think the main experience we are gaining with the practice, and to be honest, quite a lot of analysis and the way we are thinking will be really revealed very soon with the publication of this decision that was adopted yesterday, because that's, of course, is a case-specific analysis, but you can immediately see a certain way of thinking. Okay, it will still take a while because we have to have a non-confidential version, but at least it's there. And I expect that this would be one of the main bases for our for the future guidelines.
Thank you, Agatha. Then turning to Joanna and Emilio. From your perspective, in relation to what aspects of the regime were you hoping for further clarity that was not already provided by the staff working document published in July? And would you actually have any concrete suggestions as to how the Commission could facilitate the compliance by companies with the regime? I think you mentioned already one idea, Joanna, earlier, but very interested in your thoughts on this.
Please.
So I think any concrete examples would be helpful, because examples always help, and definitely this would be one area. Then, for example, how the Commission would assess the distortions or apply the indicators in practice, some examples. Because in theory, we think we all more or less understand how it works, but it's difficult to really predict that without having concrete examples. Then also, I think, indication of pre-notification timelines. As you mentioned, Francesca, I think in most cases, the pre-notification phase was of a very reasonable duration, but I've heard of cases that had very, very long pre-notification phase. So that would also be very helpful, especially in public procurement procedures, given the tight deadlines of the processes. Then maybe an idea, I know it would require quite some resources from the Commission, but to have sort of an anonymous Q&A where companies could submit questions. Would you consider this a financial contribution? And then the Commission could compile FAQ on that basis. Then another idea, but this is an idea for an exemption, whether the Commission would consider exempting providing information excluding certain countries based on the turnover of the reporting company in that country. Because if that company has a low turnover in that country, probably it's unlikely that the government of that country would have an incentive, would be incentivized to actually subsidize that company. These are just a couple of examples, but Agatha, I can share more with you offline.
No, maybe if I could immediately react, if that's okay.
Of course.
I just wanted to say that, of course, the challenge comes with the fact that, you know, even within member states, we have different setups, and outside Europe, when we speak about various jurisdictions, and that's, I mean, I know also the law firms, you are struggling with reporting to us, but it's at the same time for us, it's sometimes difficult to assess the implications of the tax arrangements in all these various jurisdictions, and then of course even access to information is difficult also for our analysis. So this that could be that's why I think at least at this stage there is this hesitation to exclude en bloc certain let's say certain cases or situations, because very similar setup in a different country can mean something else, and that's this type of analysis that, I mean, in the end, we prefer to do in the Commission, then also, you know, burden, let's say, the law firms. It's the same, the question why we look at the foreign financial contributions and the foreign subsidies, because then the assessment of the advantage is already done in the Commission and not has to be kind of filtered by the notifying parties. As regards the, you mentioned anonymous questions and answers, but I think we are open to questions and answers, and we don't have to hear who is the, you know, we got something like this, but we are always happy to engage in a discussion. What would it mean? Very specific cases, I guess we will not, well, we always balance a little bit the usefulness of publications, but indeed, as you have seen, over time we have published various answers if there were repetitive questions, and we considered that it would be of value for the bigger audience to see it. As regards the turnover, I hear you. I think, well, not that we want to be paranoid, but you know, it's like creating this kind of rule. You could also say, oh, it's a way to circumvent how you can channel some funds that can distort competition in Europe. So again, you can always, I mean, I always try to think about what kind of issue we are.
Agatha, we've lost you. I don't know if there's an issue with the link, or did you by any chance press mute?
One second, but we
can't hear the speaker anymore.
Can you see me or hear me?
Yes, we can see you. We can
now,
hear you
now you're
again.
back.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying I clearly talk too much, so that was I reached the limit. No, I was just saying that you will understand that we try to identify situations that could be problematic, and then and whether and how likely that this problem could arise. But I mean, this is a valid point for our considerations for either simplifications or additional aspects in the thresholds. We have the thresholds as regards the number, the value of FFCs per country, above which that doesn't have to be reported. So there is, we go a little bit in this direction, but indeed to further assess.
I think we are having to deal with the fact that on both sides the experience is limited, and so also for the Commission, hopefully over time, as you gain more experience, there will be more flexibility, also in the interest of, you know, the effective and efficient use of your resources. So then just perhaps the last question, just to cover the in-depth investigation in the E&D acquisition, in relation to which the decision came out yesterday. Beyond the guidance in the staff working document on how the Commission assesses distortive effects, I think it would be quite interesting to understand, and maybe you can elaborate on this, how the Commission conducts actually its assessment. For example, what type of data it relies on in the context of the, you know, looking at the different potential impacts of the transaction, both in the context, or rather the subsidies, both in the context of the acquisition process and then post-transaction, and also to what extent the Commission seeks information from other stakeholders or third parties that might have an interest in the transaction.
Yes. We, Well, as you know, the regulation gives Commission quite extensive powers in terms of requesting for information, and we try to, well, that's also our obligation to use this power, so obtain information both from the undertakings concerned, notifying parties, from competitors, from the authorities if necessary, if there is some regulatory context even in third countries. And that's why also maybe I use a moment, this is also a plea, we are very much open to receiving information from third parties, and that's from undertakings, market information on the cases, but also in any other sector, also to invest more energy, I was mentioned, for ex officio investigations. In the context of notifications, like when we opened the investigation in E&End case in July, this was also a call for third parties to submit comments, so this is another source of information. Then you mentioned this analysis as regards in particular distortion of competition. The FSR has these indications in Article 4 that we would take into account the amounts, the specificities of the sector, also the European sector, maybe some context of the acquiring undertaking, let's say how aggressive this undertaking could be. We developed a little bit on the notion of distortion indeed in the staff working document, explaining a bit that it is neither distortion as understood in the merger context nor as in state aid context. So in state aid, because it's simpler, it's just a question of having a selective advantage in a market of subject to competition, and then we can basically presume that there is a distortion. So it's not as easy as regards foreign subsidies, but also the bar, I would say, is a bit lower than in the merger context, when we are looking for obtaining, the issue would be there when the company obtains significant competitive position on the market, a dominant position, so on. So this is not as demanding in the foreign subsidies context. It's more indeed a kind of selective advantage, as you would call it, in the state aid context. But then we have to also show impact on the EU market, and actual or potential impact on the EU market, and distortion in the EU market costs, so linked with end case. It was also even in the documents in public domain, in summaries, explained that we looked at two different levels. So the distortion in the context of the acquisition process, which we found none in this specific case, and then the distortion that could be caused by the subsidies received in the past, because it's not about future foreign subsidies, but those received by the company in the past that could then have repercussions on the EU market after the acquisition, and that was the issue identified indeed in this case, including based on the internal documents which actually showed the strategic plans of the company and on what this company was planning to rely in their activities in Europe. So that's absolutely a source of information for us.
Thank you, Agata, for those comments. I don't know if we have time for questions. Maybe one question, if there is one in the room. Someone is coming with a microphone.
Right, thank you very much, Alan Riley, College of Europe. I don't want to go a very short question, but one of I understand why, obviously, you know, if you've got a major international company, you're very worried about all of the data and so forth, and naturally, this is a law conference, so we get into all the procedural issues. But just stepping back a bit, what I look at this, I see this as something which is not going to go away, and it's actually going to become greater. I know, obviously, that the legislation is drafted country agnostic, but the truth is we have, what, $4 trillion worth of Chinese subsidy provided since 2008, and then another sort of couple of trillion subsequently. And that most of this is still coming through. We've got the prospect of a China shock 2.0. So this is surely not, in a sense, that there's another huge waves of subsidization which will affect the American and European economies. So that this is not going to go away. So my question is, when we talk about, this is a kind of a meta argument for dealing with a lot of the problems that business is facing, is that those sort of problems face both the European Union and the United States. So a subsidy agreement to deal with a lot of the way subsidies are dealt with within principally the EU and the US, and then more broadly with the OECD states, would significantly reduce the scale of the burden that industry and business is feeling. That's my thought.
So I think that's a question for me. Definitely, such agreements would reduce the burden. At least they would have a potential to reduce the burden. I'm not sure whether that would be substantive reduction if it's just bilateral, US-EU, because there are many, many third countries. But definitely, this would reduce the burden. But from our perspective, the burden is in the collecting the data, right? We don't have an issue providing it. It's just collecting it, updating it is very, very burdensome. And you can imagine that our team is not the favorite team at the finance department or tax department.
And I guess hopefully over time that burden will decrease, but I think the concern currently is, at least that we're seeing coming from our clients, that the mere fact that they have to do an FSR filing is making them less attractive as a business partner, especially if you're participating in an auction process or a more competitive process. So I think we have to close this session. So I'd just like to thank our speakers for sharing their experience and insights, and I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you, Agatha. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can you still hear me? I don't know if you can hear me.
Agatha.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.